I was holding a dish towel when I heard my father give my condo away. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and roast. In the dining room, my dad raised his voice for the whole family to hear. He said the condo would be a Christmas gift for my sister's family, a real home for the grandkids, settled after the new year. My parents had never once asked me. I owned that place. I paid for it. And I stood there, towel in hand, and I clapped. I smiled. And then I did the one thing none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. I'm Myra, 34. This is the story of the night I heard my own family hand over the home I built with my own two hands, and what it cost them. If you have ever been treated like your life belongs to everyone but you, stay with me. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I drove out to my parents' house every Christmas Eve with a pie in the passenger seat and a check in my coat pocket. The pie was for the table. The check was for my dad's medical bills, the ones he never quite paid off and never quite mentioned. I had been writing that kind of check for years. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being a gift and started being a job. I was the reliable one, the accountant, the daughter who fixed things. When the water heater died, they called me. When the taxes got scary, they called me. When my sister overdrew her account in March, somehow that was my call too. I never minded enough to say no. That was my whole problem. Though I didn't have the word for it yet. My parents lived in the same ranch house I grew up in, on a quiet street where everybody knew everybody. The driveway was full that night. Shelby's minivan, my aunt's sedan, and a rental truck parked across the street that I almost didn't notice. A big white moving truck, the kind you book by the day. I remember thinking it was odd. The neighbors weren't moving in December. I parked, balanced the pie, and told myself I was tired and reading into things. I climbed the porch steps where my grandfather once taught me to tie my shoes. I had no idea that by the end of the night, that house would feel like a place I had to defend myself in. I knocked twice out of habit, even though it was my childhood home. My mother opened the door, kissed my cheek, and said, "Your father has news." She was glowing. I should have asked what kind. Dinner was loud in the good way at first. 11 of us around a table built for 8, elbows touching, gravy passed twice. My dad sat at the head with that look he got when he had a card to play. Halfway through the ham, he tapped his glass and said he had a special announcement, but it would wait until everyone was done eating. My sister Shelby caught her husband's eye across the table. Trent grinned into his plate. The grandkids kept asking if the news was a puppy. I laughed along and guessed in my head. A new baby, maybe. A new job for Trent, who had been out of work since his contracting business folded in the fall. I wanted it to be good news. I always wanted it to be good news for them. Then Trent leaned toward me, easy as anything, and asked a question that sat wrong in my stomach. He asked whether my condo could ever be sublet, if a person wanted to, hypothetically. I said I owned it outright, so I could do what I liked with it, and I changed the subject. He nodded like I had confirmed something. Shelby smiled at her plate. My mother got up to start the coffee with a spring in her step I hadn't seen in a while. I told myself families ask nosy questions. I told myself the truck across the street belonged to a neighbor. I helped clear the dishes because that was my role, and I carried a stack into the kitchen, and that was where the night cracked in half. Because the kitchen shared a wall with the dining room, and the wall was thin, and my mother's voice carried. Before I tell you what I heard, you need to understand what that condo was to me. I bought it at 28. It took me 10 years to get there. I worked 2 jobs through college, ran payroll for a trucking company by day, and waited tables on weekends. I ate a lot of cheap noodles. I drove a car with a window that wouldn't roll down. My grandfather, Walt, co-signed my very first apartment lease when no landlord would look twice at a girl with no credit. He sat across from me at a diner the day I signed it, stirred his coffee, and gave me the only financial advice he ever offered. Own something in your own name, he said. Something nobody can vote you out of. I held on to that like scripture. Every raise, I saved instead of spent. Every bonus went into one account I never touched. When I finally had the down payment, I bought a 2-bedroom condo with morning light and a little balcony, and I signed the closing papers alone. No husband, no cosigner, just my name. I painted the walls myself. I learned to fix the garbage disposal from a video. That place was not square footage to me. It was proof. Proof that the quiet girl who handled everyone else's money could stand on her own ground. My family came to the housewarming and admired it and ate my food. And then, I think, they quietly filed it away as something that belonged to all of us. A family asset. A spare room with my name on the lease by accident. I didn't know they thought that. Not until the kitchen. Not until my mother's voice came through the wall, light and certain, deciding my life. I stood at the sink with a stack of dirty plates, and I did not move. Through the wall, I heard my mother talking to Shelby, low and warm, the way she talked when something was already decided. She was saying the kids could each have their own room. She was saying Trent could set up a workshop in the second bath if he wanted. She was saying they would move in after the new year so the children could start fresh at the better school district. For a few seconds, my brain refused to assemble the words. They were talking about my condo, my morning light, my balcony, my grandfather's scripture made of brick. Then my mother said the thing that I will hear for the rest of my life. She said, in that gentle, reasonable tone, that I would understand, because I didn't need all that space. It's just me. She said, she doesn't need all that space. It's just her. Like my whole home was a mistake of distribution. Like I had accidentally been handed too much pie and the polite thing was to scrape some onto my sister's plate. I set the plates down very carefully so they wouldn't clatter. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected to feel rage, and instead I felt a cold, clean quiet, the way the air goes still before real weather. I understood, standing there, that this was not a plan they were going to ask me about. It was a plan they had already finished. The asking had been skipped on purpose, because somewhere in their hearts they were sure I would say yes. I always said yes. I dried my hands. I walked back toward the dining room, and my father was already getting to his feet. My father stood at the head of the table and tapped his glass until the room went quiet. He looked happier than I had seen him in years. He said the family had been through a hard stretch. He said Trent's work had dried up, and the kids needed stability and a yard and a real home. And then he said that he and my mother had decided to give Shelby's family the condo. He said it like a king bestowing land. Everyone turned to look at me, because of course the condo was mine, and there was a half-second where the whole table held its breath to see what I would do. My sister was already crying happy tears. The kids were cheering. Trent had his arm around Shelby and his eyes on me, and there was something in his face that wasn't gratitude. It was a dare. My father lifted his glass toward me and said the words that became the second knife of the night. He said, "It's settled." Just like that. It's settled. As if my signature was a formality, as if my ownership was sentiment. And here is the part I still think about. I smiled. I lifted my own glass. I clapped. Soft and even, like everyone else. I said, "What a Christmas." My mother beamed. My father sat back down, satisfied, sure he had read me right one more time. Shelby mouthed "thank you" across the table. I let her. Because in that moment I understood something with total clarity. If I argued, I would be the villain. The selfish one, the single woman who put square footage over her own nieces and nephews. They had built the trap so that any honest reaction would prove their story. So I didn't react. I clapped. And I started, very quietly, to do the math. I drove home that night with my hands at 10 and 2 and my mind somewhere far ahead of the road. The strange thing was how little I felt like crying. I kept waiting for it and it didn't come. What came instead was a list. I am an accountant. When the world stops making sense, I make a ledger. So I started one in my head. On one side, everything I had done for them. The checks, the tax returns, the water heater, the bailouts. On the other side, what they had just done in return. They had stood in a warm room and given away the one thing I had earned without their help. and they had not asked, because asking would have meant admitting it was mine. I realized they truly believed the condo belonged to the family, not as a metaphor, as a fact. In their version of the world, I was a kind of holding account, and the money simply flowed to whoever cried loudest. And the worst part, the part that kept my hands cold and steady, was that I had taught them to think that way. Yes, every quiet rescue. I had trained my own family to treat my life as a shared resource. I did not blame myself for being generous. I blame myself for never once drawing a line so that they forgot a line existed. I was not going to argue at a dinner table. Arguing was their game, and they had stacked it. But I had my own game, the one I was good at, the one with documents and deadlines and clean math. By the time I pulled into my own parking spot, under my own balcony, I had remembered an email I hadn't thought about in months. I woke up the morning after Christmas to a text from Shelby and a photo that made my coffee turn to acid in my mouth. The text said, "Thank you, sis. You have no idea what this means." The photo showed my niece and nephew standing on the sidewalk outside my building, pointing up at the windows, grinning. Trent had driven them over on Christmas morning to let them pick which bedrooms would be theirs. They were choosing curtains for rooms in a home I had not agreed to give up. Another text came in while I was staring at the first. Shelby asked if I could have the place empty by the 15th, because the kids' new semester started the 20th, and they wanted time to settle. She used the word empty like I was a storage unit they had rented and were now reclaiming. I put the phone down on the counter, screen up, and I made my coffee and I drank it slowly while it cooled. I want you to understand that I was not frozen. I was deciding. Part of me wanted to call her and scream the truth, that she was planning the layout of a house she did not own, that our parents had promised her my walls like they were theirs to promise. But I had learned something at that table. The moment I got loud, I lost. They would circle the wagons around the crying sister and the out-of-work husband and the kids who already picked their rooms, and I would become the cruel aunt who took bedrooms from children. So I texted back something short. Talk soon. Then I opened my laptop, and I started looking for an email from a man named Daniel Pruitt. Before I did anything else, I gave them one chance. I owed myself that, even if I didn't owe them. I drove back out on the 27th and sat at my parents' kitchen table, the same table where the announcement had been made, and I told them plainly. I said the condo was mine. I said my name was the only name on the deed. I said I had paid it off myself, every dollar, and that no one had ever asked me whether I wanted to give it away. I kept my voice level. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to give them a door to walk through. My father's face went tight. He said I was making it about money when it should be about family. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand and told me not to be selfish. She said Shelby needed it more, that the kids needed it, that I was young and single and could always buy another one someday. She said it so kindly. That was the thing that undid the last knot in me. She wasn't cruel. She genuinely could not see why a home with my name on it wasn't simply available to whoever in the family was struggling most. To her, my line in the sand was the selfish thing, not their gift of my house. I looked at both of them, and I understood the door was never going to open. They had not made a mistake I could correct with facts. They had a whole worldview, and in it, I existed to absorb the family's problems quietly. So I stopped explaining. If you have ever sat across from people who love you and realized they cannot hear you, you know the specific loneliness of that table. Take that feeling and remember it. We are going to need it later. I told them I would think about it, and I drove home to make a phone call. Trent showed up at my condo that evening without calling. I opened the door, and he was standing there in his work coat, holding a tape measure, with the rental truck idling at the curb. The same white truck I had seen across the street on Christmas Eve. He had already booked it for January 1st. He asked if he could measure the second bedroom for the kids' bunk beds, like the place was already his. I did not let him in. He told me, friendly at first, that Dad had promised, that everything was arranged, that I shouldn't make this harder than it needed to be. When I said the condo was not his to measure, His friendliness slid off like wet paint. He told me his business had collapsed, that creditors were calling his cell at dinner, that this house was the only thing standing between his kids and a worse apartment than the one they were in. I felt for him. I did. That is the honest truth, and it made everything harder. But then he said that the family had decided, and that I was outvoted, and that I needed to fall in line. Outvoted. On my own home. I came very close right then to telling him exactly what I had spent the afternoon arranging. The words were in my mouth. I wanted to wipe the entitlement off his face, but I swallowed it, because a loud win is a small win, and I wanted the kind that lasts. I told him to take his tape measure home. I closed the door. Through it, I heard him say I would regret this. I leaned my back against my own door, in my own home, and I almost laughed at how wrong he had it. The only thing I regretted was waiting so long. That night, I sat on my own living room floor, back against the couch, and opened my laptop. I searched my inbox for a name I had almost forgotten. Daniel Pruitt. He was a local investor who had knocked on doors in my building 8 months earlier, looking to buy units to rent out. Most of us ignored him. He had emailed me a polite, specific offer for my condo, cash, no contingencies, and I had written back a polite, no thank you, because I loved my home and had no reason to sell. I found the thread halfway down a folder. His offer was still there in black and white, a real number, only a little under what the place might fetch on the open market with months of showings. At the bottom, he had written that the offer stood if I ever changed my mind and left his number. I sat there and looked at it for a long time. Selling my condo would hurt. I am not going to pretend it wouldn't. This was the place I painted, the place that proved I could stand alone. But I had learned that night exactly what my family thought my home was for. It was a thing they could give away. As long as I held it, they would treat it as the family's pantry, something to be raided whenever someone was hungry. There was only one way to make it truly, permanently mine in the only sense that mattered. I had to make it nobody's. I had to make it gone. You cannot give away what no longer exists. I copied Daniel's number into my phone. I did not call yet. There was one more thing I needed to check first. One boring legal fact that would decide whether any of this was even possible. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney I had done tax work for. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya, who owed me a favor and charged me for it anyway. I asked her one question. If my name is the only name on the deed and the unit is paid off, can anyone stop me from selling it? She actually laughed. She said, Myra, it's your property. You can sell it to a stranger on the street if you want. No one else gets a vote. No one else has to sign. I asked how fast a cash sale could close if the title was clean and there was no mortgage to pay off. She said with a motivated buyer and a good title company, you could be done in under a week, maybe by the 30th if everyone moved. I thanked her and hung up and sat very still. Then the second piece fell into place, the one I had been quietly carrying for 2 weeks and hadn't told a soul about. My firm had offered me a transfer, a senior position in our Charlotte office, more money, a fresh start in a city where I knew no one. I had been on the fence because of my family, because of the checks and the rescues, and the feeling that I was the one holding everyone together. I had been about to turn it down. Sitting on my floor that morning, with Priya's words in my ears and my sister's text still glowing on my phone, the fence disappeared. There was nothing to hold together that was holding me back. I could sell the condo, take the job, and start a life in a place where no one had ever decided what I did and did not need. All I had to do was move faster than my own family. I almost didn't do it. I want to be honest about that. Because if I make myself sound certain the whole way through, you won't believe me. And you shouldn't. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor with a cardboard box I had moved 4 times and never unpacked. Inside were the bones of my 20s, a graduation tassel, a photo of Grandpa Walt squinting in the sun, a broken watch, the lease he co-signed, soft at the folds. And I held those things and I doubted myself. Because this was still my family. My mother had braided my hair. My father had taught me to drive in an empty lot. Shelby and I had shared a bunk bed and whispered after lights out. Selling my home and vanishing felt enormous, felt mean, felt like the kind of thing that could not be undone. I asked myself if I was overreacting, if I was punishing children for the sins of their parents, if a better daughter would just give a little and keep the peace. I sat with all of it, and then I dug deeper into the box, under the lease, to the bottom where I kept the most important folder I owned, the one I had not opened since the day I bought my home. When I lifted it out, my doubt did not disappear, but it finally had something solid to stand against, because of what was written on the front of that folder, in handwriting I would know anywhere. My grandfather's. He had given me the folder the week I closed on the condo, with the deed copy already inside, and I had been too overwhelmed that day to really read what he had written on the cover. I read it now. I opened the folder under the lamp, and there it was, the original copy of my deed, the document that started all of this. I had filed it the day I closed and barely looked at it since. The way you stop seeing a thing once it's yours. I made myself read every line. Grantor, grantee, legal description of the unit, and there, on the line that mattered, one name. Myra J. Gibson, sole owner. Not my parents, not the family, not Shelby. My name. Only my name, in black ink that nobody at that table had ever bothered to read. I ran my finger under it like a child learning to read. 6 years I had owned this, and my family had managed to convince themselves the name was a technicality. It was not a technicality. It was the whole truth. Recorded at the county, stamped and filed and real. And then I turned the folder over and read what my grandfather had written on the cover in his blocky, careful hand the week he watched me become a homeowner. He had written just this: yours, always. That was all. Yours, always. He had known, somehow, the man who survived losing his own father's house to other people's decisions. He had known that one day someone would try to tell me my home was not really mine, and he had left me a note for that exact night, even though he died 3 years before it came. I sat on the floor and I did not cry the loud way. I cried the quiet way, the way you do when something finally makes sense. Because his note settled the argument my parents thought they had already won. The condo was mine to keep, mine to sell, mine to burn down if I wanted. It had never been on the family ballot. I put the deed back in the folder, and the folder on my nightstand where I could see it, and I picked up my phone. It was time to call Daniel Pruitt. Daniel Pruitt picked up on the second ring, even though it was the 27th and most people were still in their holiday fog. I told him who I was, the unit number, and that if his offer still stood, I was ready to talk. There was a pause, and then I heard him smile through the phone. He said the offer stood, and if anything, the market had nudged it up, so he could do a little better than the original number. He asked why the sudden change of heart. I told him the truth, more or less. I said my circumstances had changed and I needed to move fast and clean. He liked the word clean. Investors always do. He said if the title was clear and I was firm, he could have his title company open escrow the next day and close by the 30th. Cash. No financing to wait on. I said the 30th worked. I said it like I was confirming a dentist appointment, and inside my chest something both broke and steadied at the same time. If this is landing for you, if you have ever had to decide between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, do me a favor. Hold that feeling for one more minute, because what happened on New Year's Eve is the reason I'm telling you any of this. Daniel and I agreed on the number. He texted me his attorney's information before we even hung up. I forwarded it to Priya within the hour and asked her to make sure every signature, every disclosure, every stamp was airtight, because I did not want one crack for anyone to argue through later. She wrote back one line, on it, and just like that, the machine started moving, quietly, legally. 3 days out from a New Year's Eve dinner where my father planned to hand my sister a key to a home that would no longer exist for them to take. The next 2 days were the strangest of my life, because on the outside nothing happened, and underneath, everything did. I went to work. I answered emails. I let my phone fill with messages from my family, and I did not pour gasoline on any of them. Meanwhile, escrow opened. The title company ran their search and confirmed what I already knew. Clean title. No liens. No co-owners. No surprises. One name. Daniel's attorney sent over the purchase agreement and I read every page twice, because I am the kind of person who reads every page twice, and that habit was about to save me. I signed the disclosures. I scheduled the closing for the morning of the 30th. The hardest part was not the paperwork. The hardest part was the silence. My family thought I was sulking but coming around. Shelby texted to ask if I'd thought about a moving date. My mother left a voicemail saying she knew I would do the right thing, that I had always been the sensible one. Every message assumed my surrender was just a matter of time, and I let them assume it. I did not lie. I simply stopped explaining myself to people who had never once asked me a real question. There is a kind of power in that quiet that I had never let myself use before. All my life I had over-explained, over-functioned, over-apologized. Now I just went still. I answered with a thumbs up or a short line, and I let the machine run. If you are the person in your family who always smooths things over, you know how unnatural it feels to stop. It felt like holding your breath underwater. But I was almost to the surface. 2 more days. The pressure got worse as the 30th got closer, the way it always does, right before people lose. Shelby called 4 times on the 29th. When I finally answered, she had the kids in the background and her voice was sweet and tight at the same time. She wanted to know when she could get a key. She said the kids were so excited, did I want to break their hearts? There it was. The children, set up like sandbags in front of her. I told her we would talk after the new year, and I kept my voice as flat and warm as a closed door. My mother texted a photo of curtains she had bought for the kids' new rooms. She had spent money she did not have on curtains for windows she did not own. I looked at that photo for a long time, not with anger anymore, with a kind of grief, because these were people I loved, and they had walked so far out onto a branch that I could no longer warn them off it without becoming the bad guy for sawing it. They had built this. Every assumption was aboard they had nailed themselves. All I was going to do was stop holding the ladder. My father did not text. My father did not call. He was so certain it was settled that he saw no reason to check. That, more than anything, told me I was doing the right thing. A man who believed my home was truly mine would have at least asked if I was okay. He never wondered. He had already moved on to planning the toast. I knew there would be a toast. I knew my father. And I was beginning to understand exactly how I would answer it. The only call I actually wanted came from my Aunt Lorraine on the night of the 29th. Lorraine is my mother's younger sister, the one who says the quiet part out loud at every funeral. She called and asked, straight away, if I was okay, and the question caught me so off guard that I almost couldn't answer. She was the first person in my family in days to ask how I felt instead of what I was going to give. She told me my father had been calling everyone, the cousins, the neighbors, the old crowd from church. He had told all of them about the generous gift, the condo for Shelby's family, the proud grandfather making it right. She said he had practically sold tickets to New Year's Eve so people could watch him hand over the key. She was uncomfortable, she said, because something about it didn't sit right with her. She remembered me buying that place. She remembered how hard I worked. I thanked her for asking, and I made a decision in that moment. I did not tell her my plan, because I trusted her heart but not her ability to keep a secret in a family that ran on gossip. But I did ask her one thing. I asked if she would be at the dinner. She said she would. Good, I thought. Because what I was about to do needed witnesses, and not the kind my father had invited to applaud him. I needed at least one person in that room who knew the truth of where that condo came from, so that when the story got retold 100 times afterward, there would be one voice that could say, I was there, and it did not happen the way Ray tells it. Lorraine was going to be that voice. She just didn't know it yet. The closing was at 9 in the morning on the 30th, in a small office that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. It took 40 minutes. That is the part nobody tells you. The thing that takes 10 years to build can change hands in 40 minutes, with a pen and a notary and a stack of paper. I signed where the little flags pointed. Daniel signed across from me, calm and pleased. A man who had wanted this unit for 8 months and finally got it. The title officer slid the final documents into a folder and told me the funds would hit my account by end of day. And then, it was done. The condo was no longer mine. I drove back to the building one last time, let myself in with a key that wasn't really mine anymore, and stood in the empty living room I had painted with my own hands. The morning light came through the balcony doors the way it always had, indifferent to who owned the walls. I let myself feel the loss, because it was real, and pretending it wasn't would have been its own kind of lie. I had given up my home, not to my family, to a stranger, by choice, on my terms. There is a world of difference between losing something and letting it go. My grandfather's folder was already packed in my car. I took one slow walk through the rooms, said a quiet goodbye to the balcony, and locked the door behind me for the last time. Daniel would change the locks within the week. By the time Trent's rental truck pulled up on the morning of January 1st, there would be a stranger's name on the buzzer and a stranger's key in the lock. But before that, there was a dinner. There was a toast to ruin. That afternoon, while the sale funds were landing in my account, Trent texted me one more time. "Truck booked for 9 a.m. January 1st, he wrote. "See you there." "Bring the key." He did not ask. He informed. I read it standing in my half-packed apartment, boxes everywhere, the Charlotte job already accepted in an email I had sent that morning. I did not reply. There was nothing to say to a man planning to move into a house that had sold the day before. I could have let it end there. I could have simply not shown up on New Year's Eve, let them drive to a stranger's locked door on the 1st, let the truth arrive without me. It would have been cleaner. But I am not built for clean disappearances. Not entirely. My family had made their decision in a crowded room, on purpose, so the crowd would pressure me into yes. I decided the truth deserved the same audience. Not for revenge, though I won't insult you by pretending there was none in it. Mostly because I was tired of being the quiet one who absorbed everything in private while they performed their version of events in public. I wanted to stand in the same light my father had chosen for his toast and say one true thing, out loud, where everyone could hear it. Then I wanted to leave, and keep leaving, all the way to Charlotte. So I made my decision. I would go to the New Year's Eve dinner. I would bring a folder instead of a key. I would let my father stand up and make his proud announcement one last time. And then I would stand up too. I picked out what I would wear the way you pick armor. And I drove out to my parents' house one final time. The New Year's Eve dinner was even more crowded than Christmas. My father had invited half the family and a few neighbors, just as Lorraine warned. Streamers on the mantel, a bottle of the good champagne my parents saved for weddings. Shelby and Trent sat near the head of the table like guests of honor, and the kids were wired on soda and the promise of new bedrooms. I came in quietly, kissed my mother's cheek, set a covered dish on the counter like always. I had a slim folder tucked in my bag. I said almost nothing through dinner. I watched my father glow. I watched Trent lean back in his chair like a man who already had the keys in his pocket. I caught Lorraine's eye once across the table, and she gave me a small, worried nod. When the plates were cleared, my father stood up and tapped his glass, and the room went obediently quiet, because this was the moment he had been advertising for a week. He talked about family. He talked about hard times and sticking together. He held up a single brass key on a ribbon, a prop he had clearly bought for the occasion, and he announced that as of the new year, Shelby's family would have a real home, the condo, his gift to his grandchildren. He looked at me when he said gift, daring me to flinch. Then he said it again, the same line from Christmas, the one he thought was a closed door. He said, "It's settled. The kids have a home now." The room burst into applause. Champagne started pouring. Shelby was crying again, that easy, pretty crying. Trent reached out and took the brass key from my father's hand like it meant something. Everyone turned to me, waiting for the gracious aunt to smile and bless it, the way I had at Christmas. My mother was watching me with hopeful, shining eyes. I set down my napkin. I stood up. And for the first time in my life, I did not give them what they expected. I stood up and I did not raise my voice. That was the whole strategy, the only one that ever works against people who expect you to break. I waited until the applause died down on its own, until the curiosity got heavier than the celebration, and then I spoke in the calm, even tone I use to deliver bad news to clients. I said, "Before anyone gets too comfortable, there's something you all need to know." I opened the folder and I laid 2 pieces of paper on the table, right next to the champagne. The first was a copy of my deed, with my name, and only my name, highlighted. The second was the closing statement, dated December 30th, signed and stamped. I slid them toward my father so he could see them clearly. I said, "You can't give away something that was never yours." My voice did not shake. I said, "The condo was mine, my name, nobody else's, and it's not mine anymore either. I sold it 2 days ago." The room did not understand at first. There was a beat of confused silence, the kind where people glance at each other to check if they heard right. My father picked up the closing statement. I watched his eyes move down the page to the date and the signatures and the word that finished it. Sold. His face changed slowly, like ice going gray before it cracks. Shelby stopped crying. Trent set the brass key down on the table with a small click that was somehow the loudest sound in the room. My mother put her hand over her mouth. And I just stood there, calm as a winter morning, and let the paper do what years of my explaining never could. I had spent my whole life trying to make them hear me with my voice. It turned out all I ever needed was a notarized date and the nerve to stop apologizing. The quiet held for one long second. Then it broke. Trent went first, the way I knew he would. He shot to his feet so fast his chair tipped over behind him. He slammed his hand flat on the table and the champagne glasses jumped. He shouted that I had ruined his family, that I had stabbed my own nieces and nephews in the back, that the truck was booked. The kids had picked their rooms. Who did I think I was? Spit flew. His face went purple. Shelby was right behind him, crying for real now, the ugly kind, demanding how I could be so cruel, so selfish, so cold. The room I had stayed so calm in turned into noise and pointing fingers, and at the center of it I just stood there with my hands folded, which made them angrier, because there was nothing to push against. My father found his voice and roared that I had no right, that this was a family matter, how dare I? And that was when I gave the line back to them, the one my mother had said through the kitchen wall on Christmas Eve, the one that started all of it. I waited for a gap in the shouting, and I said it quietly, so they had to go quiet to hear it. I said, "You kept telling everyone I didn't need all that space, that it was just me." I let that land. Then I said, "Well, now none of us have it." The whole room went dead silent. Shelby's mouth opened and nothing came out. Trent's purple face just hung there. My father sat down hard, like his legs had quit. I had not yelled. I had not insulted anyone. I had simply handed them back their own words with the math attached, and the math was final. Across the table, Aunt Lorraine had both hands pressed to her chest, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was nodding. She was nodding the way you nod when somebody finally says the true thing out loud. It was my mother who got to me, the way only mothers can. In the middle of all that noise, she didn't yell. She just looked at me with her hand still over her mouth and her eyes wet and confused, and she said in a small voice, "But honey, I only thought, you always seemed so fine." And there it was. The whole thing, in one sentence, with no villainy in it at all, just a lifetime of quiet assumption. She had decided I was fine. She had decided it so long ago and so completely that it stopped being something she checked and became something she built on. My being fine was the foundation under all of it. The checks, the rescues, the giving away of my home. Because Myra is fine. Myra doesn't need help. Myra doesn't need that space. Myra will understand. I felt my throat go tight, but I did not let it pull me off course, because softness here would undo everything. I looked at her and I said gently, "That was the problem, Mom. You decided I was fine, so my whole life was something you could spend." I said I loved her, and I meant it, and that was what made it land. I told her I was done being the family's emergency fund. I told her the bank was closed. Not in anger. In the flat, certain voice of a woman reading a balance. She started to cry, and part of me wanted to cross the room and hold her, the way I had held this family together for a decade. I didn't. Some boundaries only count if you let the other person feel the weight of them. I let her feel it. I did not forgive it away in the moment just to make the room comfortable. The room had been comfortable at my expense for 34 years. It could sit in the discomfort for one night. I picked up my deed and my closing statement and slid them back into the folder, because they were mine to keep, like everything else I had earned. Then I said the last thing I came to say, and I said it to the whole table, to the cousins and the neighbors and the people my father had invited to watch him be generous with my house. I told them the money from the sale was mine. I told them my life was mine. I told them I had taken a job in another city and that I would be gone within the week. I said I would always be their family, but I would never again be their account. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the spare key to my father's house, the one I had carried for years so I could check on them, let myself in, be the reliable one at any hour. I set it on the table next to Trent's useless brass prop. I said, "I think you can all manage from here." I thanked my mother for dinner, because she had still cooked it, and manners outlive everything, and I walked out. Nobody followed me at first. The room was too stunned to move. As I reached the door, I heard Lorraine's voice behind me, clear and steady, saying to the table, "She's right, you know. I remember her buying that place. None of you helped her. That was the witness I came for." I stepped out into the cold and the night air hit my face, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my chest felt wide open instead of clenched. I got in my car. I did not look back at the house. I had already seen everything in it I needed to. I left for Charlotte on the morning of January 1st, my car packed to the roof, the sunrise in my mirrors. Somewhere around the second hour my phone began to light up, and it did not stop. By the time I pulled over for gas at noon, the screen said 79 missed calls. I sat in the gas station lot and scrolled through them once, just once, before I turned the ringer off for good. Trent had called 11 times, and his voicemails went from threats to bargaining to threats again. Shelby had called and texted in long, weepy paragraphs about how I had broken her children's hearts, never once mentioning that she had planned to take my home without asking. My father called 4 times and left no message any of them, because my father does not apologize. He waits for the world to come back to him, and this time it wasn't going to. My mother called the most. Her voicemails were the only ones I listened to twice. In the last one she wasn't angry. She just said, "Please call me back, honey, please." And I sat there in that cold parking lot, and I let myself feel how much I loved her, and how I still wasn't going to call. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. The only message I answered was from Aunt Lorraine. It said, "You did the right thing, and I'm proud of you. And don't you dare let them tell you otherwise." I wrote back thank you. Then I turned off the ringer and drove. The fallout, in the plain accounting of it, looked like this. Shelby's family did not get a condo, because there was no condo to get. Trent returned the rental truck and paid the cancellation fee out of money he didn't have. My parents had to explain to every cousin and neighbor and churchgoer they had bragged to that the generous gift had evaporated, because it was never theirs to give. And for the first time in years, when something in that family broke, the phone that rang was not mine. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too. I felt quiet. I felt like a person who had finally stopped bailing water out of a boat she didn't own, and had simply stepped onto dry land, and was surprised to find it solid. Here is the only lesson I took from all of it, and I'll give it to you the way my grandfather gave things to me, plain and once. Loving your family does not mean letting them spend your life like it's loose change in the family jar. You are allowed to own something nobody gets to vote on, starting with yourself. That's where I'll leave it tonight. The dish towel in the kitchen, the toast with my house in it, the brass key, and 79 calls I never returned. If you've ever been the reliable one, the one everybody counts on and nobody asks about, let this be your sign to check whose name is really on your life. Tell me in the comments where you finally drew your line, and if this reached you, subscribe and stay with us.